All right, glad to have you back as Nigeria's government, through the National Bureau of Statistics, continues in rebasing the gross domestic product and consumer price index. BudgIT, a civil tech organization, has urged the final outcome to reflect the true economic status of the country. Mr. Onigbinde, Global Director, CEO, BudgIT, made this call at the GDP CPI sensitization workshop for CSOs, which held in Abuja. According to Mr. Onigbinde, the success of the rebasing efforts depends on building public trust in institutions responsible for its implementation. He noted that the previous rebasing underscores the substantial impact of policy changes in the services and ICT sectors, such as telecommunications, deregulation, and banking sectors recapitalization. He explained that rebasing of the GDP must reflect changes in the economy, which are a product of public policies over time. Well, let's talk to Mr. Onigbinde, Oluseun Onigbinde, co-founder, chief executive officer of BudgIT, is live in our studio. Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being in this, your wonderful, beautiful studio. This
Thank you.
First time here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's great. At least we're not talking to you via Zoom today. Well, I think we should start with this. You know, I saw your comments, and it really made real sense. Whatever NBS is coming up with should be all-encompassing and should reflect realities and engender public trust. Tell us more about what you expect.
No, I was making the point when we had a conversation with the Statistician-General, and what I made clear to him is that Nigerians want this rebasing exercise not to lead to a predetermined outcome. You know, there is a push by the current administration that they want a $1 trillion economy. And definitely we know that GDP is not a standalone statistic. If you look at GDP, you would benchmark a lot around it. We must also look at what has happened since the last rebasing exercise. Prior to the rebasing exercise, let's not forget that we had changes in the banking sector because of the reduction in the number of banks we had. We had changes in the ICT sector. We had opened up we have deregulated the telecommunications sector. We also had changes in the insurance and the service sector. So it was clear that the services sector had grown big in that period. And that's what Nigerians saw when that rebasing happened. So there was a bit of trust that was earned in that process. What I am saying clearly is that since the last rebasing, we had 2 rounds of recession. Yeah. Definitely our service sector had also moved, has grown. People, and like I saw in that exercise, they were also looking at real estate has also grown significantly. But a lot of things around trade, we have not made significant changes. Agricultural policies, we have not made significant moves. So my clarity to them is that they have to ensure that when they bring out that document, the GDP rebase, it must reflect the perceived changes in the economy over the time. It's not just going to be that we have a $1 trillion economy, because you're still going to benchmark against debt to GDP. You're going to benchmark against revenue to GDP. You're going to benchmark against private sector earnings to GDP. You're going to benchmark even at GDP per capita. So you want to make sure that whatever we're coming across at that point, it's realistic. Let's also forget that they're going to do some time series, which means they're going to go back maybe 5 years so that they can readjust the GDP numbers.
It's a lot of work.
It's a whole lot of work. And I was just asking, and they've said that the World Bank, IMF, and all key multilateral institutions have been involved in the entire process.
Yes.
So they've mentioned that they've done all their best to ensure a high level of integrity in the process. And
it's 2 in 1. It's not just GDP, it's GDP and CPI.
Yeah.
So it's 2 in 1.
And same thing, we also want to look at CPI. If you look at the CPI basket, more than 50% of that is tied to food.
Yeah.
So if you're saying you're tackling food inflation as a general metric, and you are not tackling food inflation, you're deceiving yourself. And you will see that food inflation has moved at a higher rate than general inflation, which includes the core inflation. So what I've also said, if you're rejigging that basket, what I'm hearing, what I'm saying is that they want to limit the impact of food. You also want to be honest about yourself that a typical household spending in Nigeria, what does the matrix look like? How much are they spending on food? How much are they spending on healthcare, how much are they spending on accommodation and the rest. When you also want to look at that, you also want to take a look at urban and rural. Be much more definitive in that sense, because how much the spending dynamics for someone living in a city is different from the spending dynamic of someone living in a rural area. So you want to be as objective as possible, because a lot of macroeconomic decisions are going to be made
following these figures
on the basis of this data.
And these figures, you know, like you said, the World Bank, other countries would work with it because whatever they see here is. And you see reports even lately. You see the World Bank coming to say Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, making it look like they already know that this is going to make us the largest economy. But presently, considering the FX value and all of that, I think we are number 3 or
even, I think
number 4. I think we have Egypt and some other countries, South Africa,
even Nigeria, Morocco,
ahead of us.
So we're not doing great at all. But if you adjust, but by the time we do this rebasing, definitely the naira value of the economy will be fully reflected. And so by the time you adjust that for the USD, I don't think anything we do right now puts us as the largest economy in Africa. I don't think so. Quality of life in Nigeria is significantly weakened. Standard of living has been poorer than it used to be. So if we go ahead and carry a huge badge and say we're still the largest economy of the continent, I don't think we are anymore. I believe that maybe we are still trailing to South Africa, because if you put our metrics side by side, our revenue to GDP is still very, very weak. And it's going to get weaker if we have a larger GDP than what we used to have. Our debt to GDP will even be much more lower. It could create a crisis for us, because the government might now get enough motivation for us to continue to borrow haphazardly. You know, and let's not forget, if you borrow too much, you service with a lot of money, it has impact on your fiscal size, it has impact on your budgeting. So it's for government to also look at the data holistically. So if whatever the GDP numbers come in, you have to be very honest with yourself that you don't, because of the GDP, take erratic action. And that's one of the things I mentioned to the MBS. Don't just bring out the numbers, inform policy. Don't just say this is what the GDP is. Let them understand the implications and the limitations of your study, so that people just don't take wrong public policies that would have impact over time.
So we should expect policies and programs that will lead to national objectives for benefit of Nigeria. What sort of policies are we supposed to be looking at, particularly with the fallout of the reforms of government? What sort of interventions are we looking at in 2025 before we talk about some international developments?
One of the policies we should be looking at is agriculture. I mean, if you look at the current GDP we have right now, and 80% of agriculture, which is around 20%, if you put it together, of the GDP is crop production. And I also just feel like, and I think the MBS mentioned that, they don't think that livestock farming has been adequately captured within the GDP. I think it's something they want to correct in this current cycle. So in some sort of way, we would want to see what that looks like. But it also means that if you're not making big shifts in agriculture, if that is your key element of your production, of your economy, if you're not making big shifts in there, you're not changing anything. So if there's anything the government should learn from that, is that it needs to expand agriculture, and expand it for internal consumption, expand it for also being export oriented.
True.
The also thing you also want to see there is in services. If there is an opportunity for our real estate to be properly documented and acknowledged, it also means that the government has to look at what is the opportunity to expand that. Maybe through a mortgage or credit finance. We've been speaking about doing a proper mortgage, a state-backed mortgage entity. I mean, since the Okonjo-Iweala days, I mean, since the Goodluck Jonathan days, we've never been able to move at the level where home ownership would be easily accessible for Nigerians. So that might also bring an insight to what the government, and service exports too. We'll not lie, fintech has been the biggest growth driver within the digital space. And so that will also get a whole lot of recognition, the payment ecosystem. So how do you also optimize that effectively to also generate service exports? we can also build, some of these entities also have offices now in Kenya and across the continent. So how do we also optimize for that? So I think if you look into the digital economy and you bring it to real estate, and you also bring in the agriculture, those would be my 3 key elements in how something to look at.
Let's look at some international development now. I know my chat with Nevin earlier, you know, we talked about the tariff thing and all of that, but we also see the Dodge, that's Elon Musk's takeover of USAID agency by Dodge operatives, and many are talking about this. I don't know how that comes to you and how you react to some of these moves happening in the United States.
I mean, it's just give us a revelation that government is messy everywhere. And it's challenging everywhere. I mean, it's welcome for that government should be more efficient.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Mr. Elon Musk and his team has been doing. And also that has implications for us in Nigeria and in Africa. You said spends roughly, I mean, their budget is $824 million. I mean, Nigeria is one of the top 15 recipients of aid from USAID. So definitely, if that money is taken out, which is going to happen, which has happened already.
It has happened already.
A lot of jobs are on the line.
Yeah.
A whole lot of value is on the line. And also that has a wider implication for Nigeria's development sector, which BudgIT is also part of. So there's a bit of worry in there. I mean, you say there's been an opportunity for the US for soft power projection. They've used it also. I mean, people say for intelligence operations. But we have a whole lot in Nigeria that's also highly dependent on USAID, and the government has to holistically address that, especially the health sector. There's a whole lot of spending by USAID on Nigeria's health sector that has to be paid attention to.
True.
Especially people who looked at HIV, they looked at primary healthcare systems, tuberculosis, and all those aids. So for me, it's a worry. I think for the Dodge, Nigeria needs its own version of Dodge, and you could see from what's happening in the US, it's led from the top. The US president is insisting that they want to make government efficient. We might argue that a lot of what Elon Musk and his team is doing is not coming from a good place. They're not acting in good faith. Because it's like, see, if you want to throw the baby and the bathwater out, there are some things that you say does right, and there are some places that it also needs to be more efficient. So that context has to happen. But we as Africans, we as Nigeria also have to appraise what's the impact of all of this.
Interesting stuff. But looking ahead, you know, it's always good to project despite these challenges. What do you think will be the fallout of all of these moves by President Trump generally?
I mean, Trump has come up with an agenda. He has an agenda.
He said that even during the campaign.
Yeah, he came up with his manifesto. A lot of things he's doing right now, he put it forward in the campaign. And he's also not running for second time, as of today.
Of course.
So I think he's running his agenda. The U.S., I think its institutions will be tested as it's been tested right now. What Africa also just have to ask itself is that what do we do? And I think what we have to put forward is trade. Africa needs to figure out how to trade. Look at the tariffs with Canada and Mexico. Yeah. It just means that Canada and Mexico are not talking to U.S. in the terms of aid. They're not asking for USAID support at scale. They're asking, we want to trade with you. Africa also has to come up together and say, how do we build our efficiencies and ensure to take opportunities of this market? I mean, like you mentioned, we had the AGOA, which we have not taken enough.
We didn't do anything around
it. Benefit
EFCFTA is there again going.
The EFCFTA, we did fancy offices, we created secretariats, but we have not taken opportunity as we should have.
No.
So trade has to be at the center of Africa's conversation at this point. And we have to, it's a very competitive environment. It requires a whole lot of efficiency.
It is. It does. Mr. Onigbinde, it's always nice to have you in-house in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in. Let me get a handshake. And thank you really for coming in to the studio today.